Hey, I'm Carson, and today I'll be making a dish called Katillos Ornatos. This recipe was written by Athenaeus probably around 200 AD or so. Katillos Ornatos is essentially battered and deep-fried lettuce with a bunch of pepper on it. Pepper was pretty expensive to import back in the Roman Empire days, so its addition basically says that this dish was made for the wealthy. Well, anyways, enough talk, let's make it. So the first ingredient is lettuce, and I'll be using 4 leaves of romaine lettuce today. And that's because the Romans actually would have had this type of lettuce, thus the name, romaine. And they actually got it from the Greeks, who got it from the Egyptians. So it's kind of funny how it was named after the Romans. So yeah, the first step is to take this lettuce and to grate it. But we're not going to be using a grater today. We're actually going to be using something different. Instead of a grater, we're going to use a food processor because grating lettuce doesn't sound like the most fun thing right now. So yeah, let's take this and cut it up. Now before we grind this up, we got to add the next ingredient, which is wine. And back in the Roman Empire, if you were rich, probably the best wine around was Falernian wine. I hope I'm saying that right. But it was basically a white wine that was aged 10 years, was probably around 15% alcohol level, and was like an amber color. But that wine doesn't exist today, so we gotta use the next best thing, which is the $9 bottle of wine you can find at the store. I'm hoping it's good enough to be a substitute, but we'll see. So the recipe says to add the wine. Well, let's see. I'm going to add half a cup of wine into here. It doesn't give exact amounts in the recipe. This is really just guesswork. So I'm going to add this in. All right, now we're ready to mix it up. So the next step is to squeeze out the liquid, and I'll be doing that with a cheesecloth. But in the past, they would have probably done this in the mortar because there were mortars back in the day that had little spouts on them, and you could probably just pour the liquid out the side like that, and then you could probably just squeeze the rest out, like the rest of the liquid out with your hand, like inside the mortar or something. Yikes, that looks nasty in there. My hands are gonna smell like wine for like the rest of the night, but that's fine. Okay, so now we got our like semi-dried out lettuce mush here. So the step after that is to knead in flour. Flour like this probably wouldn't have existed back in the day. This is pretty processed flour. It's very white. Flour back then would have been ground by hand. So you probably would have had a slave if you were rich, which is, you know, the person who would be eating this dish. So your slave would have used probably a saddle quern to grind down their own flour. And that would have left a lot of like extra bits from the grain in there. And you just don't really see that in this sort of flour. Although rich people probably would have been eating a naked grain version of flour, which doesn't have the hull. So you wouldn't have those extra like brown bits in there or whatever. So this is like pretty close to what they would have had, but not really. But it's the best that I'll do right now. So I've let this settle for a while, and now I'm gonna knead it vigorously, like the recipe says. So I'm just gonna mix it up as much as I can. Now the next 2 ingredients are pork fat and pepper. And now for pork fat, we're gonna be using just straight up lard. I'm using about 1 tablespoon's worth here. And I'm gonna just sprinkle pepper like quite a bit, because they would have used a lot of pepper to show off back in the day. So I'm gonna use about that much pepper. And now we're gonna mix it all together, and we're supposed to knead it together again. Now, since the lard made it so sticky, I'm adding more flour again to make it back into sort of a dough texture. The next step is to roll this into a thin sheet. So now that I've rolled it into a thin sheet, I'm gonna cut it into small pieces. Now, back in the Roman times, they probably would have done this with a knife, but I'm using a pastry cutter here just to make my life a little easier. So now I've got very even pieces, and yeah, now we're gonna take them to the stove for the next step. So now I'm gonna try some of my Falernian wine. I have it watered down like the Romans or Greeks would. This is probably around 2 parts water to 1 part wine. So like the Romans would do. Yeah, I know I'm a little barbaric. The Greeks would have done 3 parts or 4 parts to 1. And this isn't spiced either. So it's not exactly accurate, but it'll be interesting to try. But as you can see, it's basically, I can't even tell it's wine. It just looks like water. So now I'm gonna try it. Yeah, I think it's better to be a barbarian. I'm just saying. So now I've added extra virgin olive oil to a pan. Now I'm going to turn it to medium heat. The wealthy Romans would have likely used the same kind of olive oil because it's made from younger olives, which produce less oil and is harder to extract, but the oil tastes better. So it's more expensive, so yeah. So they wouldn't have been using a pan like this. They would have used a chitra or a cacabus on top of a brazier, which is essentially a terracotta pot on top of a little like stove. And they would have done this outside, and it would have been a slave doing it as well. And the way they would have done it is they would have filled that pot with olive oil, and they would have dipped a colander with the pieces of lettuce like dough inside. They would have dipped that down and let it fry, and then pulled it out. But I'm doing it this way because it saves olive oil. Okay, so I believe the oil is hot enough now, so now I'm just gonna place these in the oil. So as you can see, they're sort of turning golden brown. And when you see them turning golden brown around the edges, that means you should probably flip them over. So now I've got some Katillos Ornatos. They look pretty crispy. They smell like something deep fried. Maybe deep fried a little too long. But yeah, now I'm gonna try it. They're not that good. They're very flaky though. They're flaky, but they're dry. I think I've probably over fried these ones. But it's like eating like the edge of a pie crust. You don't even taste the lettuce at all in this, actually. So it's my assumption that these Katillos Ornatos probably would have been eaten as an appetizer because lettuce was seen as like a heavy sitting food, or not heavy, like a food that would float to the top of your stomach so that it wouldn't digest fully. And it was sort of like the opposite of an aphrodisiac. So you'd eat it at the beginning of a meal, and so it'd counteract everything the meat would do later. So yeah, these would probably be eaten early on. They feel like that kind of food. If you want to make these at home, now you know. And that's it. Thanks for watching.